Winnie Byanyima, thank you for accepting this interview for Women and Boards, also known as La Gouvernance au Féminin. You're Oxfam International's Executive Director, a grassroots activist, human rights advocate, senior international public servant, as well as a world-recognized expert on women's rights. You have an atypical career path. You were born in Uganda, and then you went to the United Kingdom where you earned engineering degrees. You began your career as an engineer at Uganda Airlines, and then you served 11 years in the Uganda Parliament, where you led Uganda's first parliamentary women caucus. You joined Oxfam 2 years ago to provide humanitarian relief in crisis, empower poor and marginalized people to gain social and economic equality. You intervene in 94 countries, and you say you want to support poor people to claim their rights and to finally escape poverty, hunger, and injustice. Yesterday at the Economic Forum, you passionately shared some of your concerns. Could you please tell us what you feel could make some deep change in the lives of people living in poverty, mainly women?
Well, thank you for having me. Well, today, the two biggest challenges that humanity is facing are climate change and rising economic inequality. Unless we tackle them, the world is not safe. Men and women are not safe, and we are moving towards extreme inequality and extending beyond our planetary boundaries. So I'm here to tell the business leaders and political leaders that there are solutions, that we are not helpless, but that they need to be bold and courageous to tackle these challenges. On the question of rising inequality, I think we have an excellent opportunity now. We are about to agree the Sustainable Development Goals, and we have worked hard as Oxfam to make sure that those Sustainable Development Goals that will be agreed in September put women's rights at the center. There are now 17 goals, and we have insisted on one goal on gender equality, and also for gender equality to cut across all of them. It's important that they are adopted. But before that, there is a conference on financing for development in July, and that will look at how do you fund these goals. And there, we again am calling on the leaders here to be brave. Use that opportunity to tackle the problem of a leaking global tax system. We have a situation where the very rich people, the very rich companies are able to make their production in one place, earn their profits there, but ship them to another country where they can avoid paying taxes. The loopholes for tax avoidance are huge and are cheating poor countries of the resources they could use to lift men and women out of poverty. I gave one example. I gave an example of why this kind of inequality that's being driven by tax avoidance and tax evasion is dangerous. Take the case of, I gave the example that inequality traps people in poverty forever, that it's impossible to reduce poverty with these levels of inequality. I also talked about the fact that inequality is bad for growth, it's bad for business, because it depresses consumption. And so it's in their business interest, it's a moral imperative that we reduce inequality. So at the Financing for Development Conference, we want these leaders to go there. First of all, at the highest level, ministers of finance should go to the meeting and agree on a process to establish international tax cooperation, a regulatory body under the UN that will make sure that these loopholes are closed and companies pay their fair share. That's one of the ways. The other way, of course, is delivering quality public services to all people, men and women, health, education, skills for our young people, for jobs. And for women, this is critical. Women living in poverty rely on these public services much more than men. The burden of unpaid care work is on them. And unless governments roll out services to take care of these, women can't move into the work area and earn incomes and live the productive lives they want. So childcare, good transportation, health, education are so important for women to be able to live dignified lives.
Well, I think these are very fair demands, Winnie. I'd like to talk briefly about your own personal experience. When you fled Uganda, you were only 17 years old, you went to the UK penniless, and your first stop was at an Oxfam shop to get a coat. So I was wondering what your mindset was at the time, how you felt, and if you were feeling that life was unfair, that life was difficult, or if you already had that ambition, that resilience, and the thought that maybe one day you would be Oxfam's International Executive Director yourself.
I never thought I was going to be Oxfam's International Executive Director. But when I arrived in England, I was an angry girl. I was very angry having to run away and leave my family, leave the university that I loved, where I was doing quite well, and come to this lonely country that's cold and wet. I was angry at injustice, at the dictatorship in my country, and I'm very grateful to the country that embraced me, the UK, because when I got there, I was able to channel my anger into constructive ways of resisting dictatorship and violation of human rights. I joined human rights groups. I joined Ugandan dissident groups that were fighting against the brutal regime of Idi Amin, a military dictator. I joined women's rights groups on the campus and got conscientized and strengthened about acting as a women's rights defender. And I learned how to organize, how to work as a collective and realize social justice. So England transformed my anger into and unleashed my own potential as an activist. So that's what happened to me. I never thought that I'm beaten. That's a fact. I always knew that this is a new beginning. I am going to rise. I'm going to be better than this, but I didn't know what I would be.
Well, your anger turned into something very positive and very productive and very helpful for others. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I can really relate because in my personal history at 17, I was alone in Paris while my parents were in Lebanon during the war. So I also used that anger against everything that was happening in my country in a positive way to help others here in Canada, where I've been living for 25 years now. Winnie, you don't think charity is the way to solve problems in developing nations. You don't believe that just lifting everybody out of poverty is going to be done through asking money to the more wealthy people. So what do you propose?
I said that really to explain that while the developing countries, the poor countries, are relying on aid and need aid, and indeed they do, because there are many countries, at least 40 or so countries, that can't balance their budgets, that need aid, that this will not be the route that will bring them out of poverty. They have to do more than receive aid. And I said that because it's so important that we tackle the structural causes of poverty. Poverty doesn't rain on people. People are not poor because God doesn't like them or they are unlucky. They are poor because they are denied opportunity, because their rights are not being respected, not being upheld. So it's about claiming rights. It's about tackling where injustice is, such as I mentioned, in many of these countries, you have huge resources being extracted, say minerals, oil, gas, gold, diamonds, and being shipped away, and a few companies making the profits from them. They are not being taxed fairly, and the resources, the few resources that are gained are not being plowed back into people's lives, into their education and skills, and into sectors that provide jobs for young people. So You're getting figures of growth for some poor countries, 7% growth, but numbers of poor increasing, showing that growth has been captured by just a few. So my issue here is that we must make growth inclusive. We must make sure that wealth creation is taxed fairly and resources come back to create opportunities for people living in poverty. That is not aid. That is tackling the root causes of poverty right there at the root. And that's what I was talking about. Aid is good, it's helpful, but it's becoming anyway less and less. And also, you know what we are finding is that the numbers of people living in poverty now, majority of them are now living in rich countries. They are in India, they are in a country like Nigeria. These are now countries that are rich. They've become middle income. So the question of aid does not apply anymore. No one's going to give aid to Nigeria or India. So it's a question of them tackling inequality, making sure that wealth being created is lifting everybody out of poverty.
Well, I was in Johannesburg 2 weeks ago for the International Women's Forum, and I have to say a lot of these issues that you're covering have been discussed at length as well. So I think there is a true realization that things need to change, and the governments are going to have to start listening. So I'm certain we will see change, hopefully in the near future.
Absolutely.
Winnie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today.
And thank you for having me.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Good luck in your work.
Thank you so much.